Portland, Oregon, December 4:47 in the morning, and Marcus Webb already knew this day would cost him something. The scream came through the thin apartment wall like it always did, Dylan's voice breaking apart in the dark, calling for someone who wasn't there anymore. Marcus was on his feet before his brain caught up, bare feet hitting cold linoleum, muscle memory taking over where sleep had failed. Dylan's room smelled like the lavender spray the school counselor had recommended 6 months ago. Didn't work then, didn't work now. The boy sat upright in twisted sheets, eyes open but not seeing sweat plastering dark hair to his forehead. 8 years old and already carrying weight that made grown men buckle. Marcus knelt beside the bed close enough to ground him but not touch. Touch made it worse during the nightmares. The therapist had explained it twice patiently, like Marcus was the child who needed teaching. Give him space to come back. Let him find you instead of forcing yourself into his panic. The waiting stretched. Dylan's breathing slowed by degrees, the kind of gradual shift you could miss if you weren't watching for it. His eyes focused first on the Spider-Man poster Marcus had hung crooked on purpose. Dylan liked fixing things, finding order in small chaos. Then the bookshelf with its neat rows of graphic novels. Finally Marcus. No words. Dylan had never spoke after the nightmares, not anymore. The selective mutism had started 2 years ago as occasional silence evolved into something that swallowed more of him each month. At school, he was a ghost. At home, he was better mostly, but nights like this reminded Marcus how fragile better really was. Marcus stayed on his knees until Dylan's shoulders dropped, until the boy reached for the glass of water on the nightstand. Small sips, 3 of them. Routine was safety. When Dylan lay back down, Marcus stood. His lower back protested too many years bent over industrial sinks, scrubbing pans that weighed more than his son. He kept the grimace off his face. Kids noticed everything, especially the ones who'd learned to watch instead of speak. Back in his own room, Marcus knew sleep was done for the night. 4:53. The coffee maker gurgled to life in the kitchen while he pulled on yesterday's jeans from the floor. Laundry was Saturday's problem. Today was Thursday. He still had 2 days to pretend he had his life together. The apartment was small enough that he could see Dylan's door from the kitchen counter. It stayed closed. Marcus poured coffee into the mug Dylan had made in art therapy, lopsided, glazed in colors that didn't quite match perfect. He drank it black because buying milk meant one more thing to remember, one more variable in the constant equation of making it through. 5:30, Dylan's alarm would go off in an hour. Marcus used the time the way he always did, scanning the job listings. He wouldn't apply for calculating. Rent, he'd barely make, staring at the phone bill he'd already paid late twice. The arithmetic of survival never balanced. It just reset every month and demanded you try again. 6:15. Dylan emerged from his room in the school uniform Marcus had washed Tuesday night, hung to dry because the dryer had died in September, and replacing it meant choosing between that and Dylan's therapy copays. The uniform was wrinkled. Marcus told himself it didn't matter. Teachers understood. They had to understand. Breakfast was cereal and silence. Dylan ate methodically, 7 bites, paused 7 more. Patterns helped. Structure was armor against a world that made no sense. Marcus was pouring his second cup when he noticed the notebook on the counter. Dylan's journal, the one the therapist made him keep, said it would help process feelings he couldn't voice. Marcus shouldn't read it. He knew that. Privacy mattered even for 8-year-olds, especially for kids learning to trust again after a mother walked out calling them too much work, not enough reward. But the notebook was open. Dylan had left it that way, maybe on purpose, maybe asking for something he couldn't say out loud. Marcus read the last entry. The letters were careful, pressed hard into the paper like Dylan was trying to make them permanent. Today I raised my hand 7 times. Mrs. Delaney called on me 0 times. I think I'm invisible. The coffee turned bitter in his mouth. Marcus flipped back 1 page, then another. Brady pushed me in the hallway. I said, "Excuse me." He looked right through me like I wasn't there. At lunch, I tried to sit with the other kids. They kept talking like I didn't exist. Maybe I don't. Dad says be brave. But what if being brave doesn't work? The notebook shook in Marcus's hands. Not from anger, though there was plenty of that. From recognition. From the sick certainty that his kid was disappearing in real time, and every adult in that school was letting it happen. He looked up. Dylan was watching him spoon halfway to his mouth, eyes carrying a question he didn't have words for. Marcus set the notebook down, walked around the counter. Knelt so they were eye level because that mattered, because kids needed to know you saw them as people, not projects. His throat was tight. The words came anyway, pushed through by something that felt like desperation and love in equal measure. Dylan, look at me. When people make you invisible, it's not because you don't matter. It's because they're too cowardly to see you. And I'm making you a promise right now. If I ever see someone being made invisible, I won't stay quiet. I'll stand up. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Dylan's eyes filled. He didn't cry, just blinked hard and fast, like he was trying to push everything back down where it wouldn't hurt so much. Marcus kept going, the promise building momentum like a train that couldn't stop once it started moving. I need you to make the same promise. When you see someone being ignored, someone being treated like they don't exist, you remember this moment. You remember that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are. Dylan nodded, once, definite, then reached for his backpack, routine reclaiming the space emotion had tried to fill. Marcus watched him go through the motions, check for homework, zip the front pocket, adjust the straps he'd worn loose since last week. The school bus came at 7:15. Marcus walked Dylan to the stop 3 blocks down. Same as always, except this morning he was hyper-aware of everything, the way Dylan's shoulders hunched against cold. He barely seemed to notice the careful space he kept between himself and the other kids, waiting the absolute silence where there should have been the chaos of children being children. When the bus pulled away, Marcus stood on the corner longer than necessary. The promise he'd made Dylan sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. He'd meant every word. He just had no idea how much it would cost him. By 2 o'clock, Marcus was at the Meridian, filling in for a dishwasher who'd called in sick. Again. Third time this month, but Marcus didn't complain. Extra shifts meant extra money, and arguing about reliability would require him to forget his own attendance record from 6 years ago, when Dylan was 2, and Jennifer had just walked out, and Marcus had barely managed to show up to his own life, let alone a job. The Meridian was the kind of restaurant Marcus would never eat at. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than his annual salary. White tablecloths that got replaced after every seating. A wine list thicker than Dylan's homework folder. The kitchen alone was bigger than his apartment, all stainless steel, and controlled chaos stations for garde-manger and saucier and pastry that might as well have been foreign countries for how much he understood their borders. His station was the pit. 3 deep sinks, commercial dishwasher that ran so hot the steam made breathing difficult, and an endless stream of plates and pans and glassware that needed to be spotless. Not clean. Spotless. This was the kind of place where a water spot meant starting over. Marcus had been at it 90 minutes when the kitchen door swung open and Robert Ashford's voice cut through the usual din of tickets printing and orders being called. Everyone, front of house, now! And the sous chef, Callum Brennan, Irish-American temper, like a blade perfectionist to the point of cruelty, looked up from the salmon he was portioning, exchanged glances with the line cooks. Nobody moved. Robert's face was pale under the fluorescent lights, skin stretched tight over bones that seemed sharper than they had this morning. 4 years sober, and it still showed in the tension he carried, the way stress lived in his jaw. I said now. They assembled in the narrow hallway between kitchen and dining room servers in pressed uniforms, cooks in whites that wouldn't stay white much longer. Marcus still in his dishwashing apron, with Tyler embroidered on it because the last guy had quit and nobody had bothered getting Marcus his own yet. Didn't matter. He wasn't supposed to be visible anyway. Robert waited until everyone was there. Sienna Barrett stood near the front, 28, senior server, blonde hair, pulled back in a knot so tight it looked painful. Her hands were shaking. Marcus noticed because Sienna never shook. She was steel in heels, the kind of server who could handle a table of drunk hedge fund managers hitting on her while still remembering who ordered their steak medium rare. She's coming back tonight. The hallway went cold. Someone behind Marcus swore under their breath. Sienna pressed her lips together until they disappeared. Robert continued, each word dropping like a stone into still water. Sterling reserved table 12. 7 p.m. corporate called me directly. Said we will provide our usual excellent service. That's not a request. That's an order. Marcus had no idea who Sterling was. He caught fragments of whispers, pieces of a story he'd missed while his head was in the sink. Callum was the first to speak, his accent thick, the way it got when he was angry. You can't be serious. You can't ask us to serve that woman. Not after what she did. Not at that table. I'm not asking. James died, Robert. He's dead. Because of her. The name landed different than the others. James. Past tense. Marcus's stomach tightened. Robert's voice cracked on the edges, carefully controlled emotion bleeding through. You think I don't know that. You think I don't see him every time I walk past that table. But Sterling Hospitality owns 40% of this restaurant. They can shut us down tomorrow if they want. They've made it very clear we serve her or we close. Sienna found her voice smaller than Marcus had ever heard it. I can't. Robert, I can't. I was there. I heard what she said to him. I watched his face when... I know. 2 weeks later, he was dead. 2 weeks. The hallway was packed, but somehow the space around Sienna had expanded, everyone giving her room like trauma was contagious. Robert looked at her with something close to grief. I can't make you do this, Sienna. I won't. But I'm asking everyone else, someone has to serve table 12 tonight. Someone has to do this job. Marcus understood then the shape of it at least. Some woman named Sterling had done something to someone named James. Something bad enough that 6 months later, the entire staff was still carrying it. Callum's hands were fists. She humiliated him, in front of investors, in front of the entire dining room. Called him incompetent. Told him she'd make sure everyone in the industry knew it. The deal fell apart. $40 million gone. The media picked it up. His reputation was destroyed. Robert's voice was barely audible. And 14 days later, James Novak hung himself in his apartment, left a note that said he couldn't come back from what she'd done to him. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of a man's death, the guilt of everyone who'd survived him, the terrible knowledge that they were being asked to serve the person responsible. Marcus thought about Dylan's journal, about invisible people and the ones who made them that way, about promises that felt impossible to keep. Robert was still talking words Marcus only half heard because he was busy processing the rest. Sterling Hospitality, partnership agreements, corporate pressure, a manager who'd lost his last job to alcoholism and couldn't afford to lose this one. I need volunteers. Anyone willing to serve table 12 tonight? No hands went up. Sienna was crying now, quiet tears that didn't stop her from standing perfectly still. Callum looked like he wanted to put his fist through a wall. The other servers found fascinating things to stare at on the floor. Marcus understood that too. This was survival math. Everyone here needed this job the way Marcus did needed the paycheck and the insurance and the routine that kept chaos at bay. But some prices were too high even for survival. Robert's shoulders sagged. All right, I'll figure something out. Get back to work. The group dispersed like smoke, everyone moving fast to be somewhere else, anywhere else. Marcus returned to his station. Scrubbed pans that were already clean, trying to process what he'd just learned. A woman was coming to dinner. A woman who'd destroyed someone 6 months ago. A woman so powerful the restaurant had to serve her or close. And nobody was willing to go near her. Marcus thought about Dylan waiting for him at home. About the promise he'd made this morning. About doing what was right when it wasn't easy. He went back to scrubbing, kept his head down, told himself it wasn't his problem. 4 o'clock and Victoria Sterling sat in a conference room 30 floors above Portland, listening to her CFO explain why they'd exceeded quarterly projections by 18%. The board members around the polished table nodded approval, made notes, asked questions designed to show they'd been paying attention. Victoria heard none of it. She was thinking about the sleeping pills in her office desk, the ones her doctor had prescribed when the insomnia started 6 months ago. 2 pills every night. The bottle said 1. Her doctor didn't understand that 1 wasn't enough to stop the dreams. Her assistant Kimberly, efficient and terrified in equal measure, slipped her a note during the CFO's presentation. Victoria read it without reaction, years of practice keeping her face neutral. The Times running anniversary piece on Novak. Ice Queen who broke a chef is the working headline. Victoria folded the note, set it aside, continued listening to projections and profit margins and all the numbers that proved she'd built something that mattered. The meeting ended at 4:45. Handshakes, congratulations, board members filing out with the satisfied air of people who'd just gotten richer without doing anything. Victoria waited until the room was empty before allowing herself to breathe. Kimberly appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, already moving to the next crisis. The Times wants a comment. I've drafted a standard no comment response, but send it. Your reservation at the Meridian is confirmed for 7. Mr. Ashford sounded nervous when I called. Victoria almost smiled. Nervous. That was one word for it. Anything else? Kimberly hesitated. That was new. In 3 years, she'd learned to deliver bad news without flinching, to schedule impossible meetings and make them happen, to anticipate Victoria's needs before Victoria knew she had them. Hesitation meant something had gotten through her armor. The team is worried about optics. Going back to that restaurant on the 6-month anniversary with the Times running a piece. I don't pay them to worry about optics. I pay them to run my company. Of course, I'll let them know. Kimberly left. Victoria remained in the empty conference room, looking out at Portland, spread below her, like a map she'd already conquered. Sterling Dynamics occupied 3 floors of this building. Her company, her vision, built from nothing but fury and determination and the absolute refusal to ever be powerless again. She thought about the reservation. Table 12. The same table where she'd eviscerated James Novak 6 months ago for serving undercooked lamb to investors whose $40 million deal had evaporated because of his incompetence. No, not incompetence. Sabotage. That's what it had been. The man had deliberately ruined her dinner, her deal, her reputation. She'd simply responded appropriately. If he couldn't handle honest criticism, that was his weakness, not her fault. Except he'd killed himself. 14 days after she'd finished with him, James Novak had decided a rope was better than trying to come back from the public humiliation she'd delivered. Victoria stood, walked to her office. The pills were in the bottom drawer behind files she never needed to access. She took 2 without water, swallowed them dry, and told herself it was fine. Everything was fine. She'd done nothing wrong. The lie sat in her throat like broken glass. Her calendar showed meetings until 6. She canceled them all. Went home to the penthouse overlooking the river glass walls and sharp edges. Everything expensive and nothing warm. The shower ran hot enough to hurt. The bourbon she poured was older than most of her employees. The dress she chose was black because it was always black. 6:45. Victoria stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying makeup with the precision of someone preparing for battle. Foundation to hide the circles under her eyes. Mascara to make them look bigger, more intense. Lipstick the color of wine. She looked at herself and saw what everyone else saw. Power, control, success. The woman who'd clawed her way up from waiting tables in Seattle to running a tech empire worth billions. What they didn't see was the girl who'd been fired at 22 for serving the wrong wine to a VIP. The manager who'd screamed at her in front of the whole restaurant told her she was nothing, that there were 100 girls who could replace her. The way she'd walked out with her last paycheck and sworn on everything she had that she'd never be powerless again. 21 years. It had taken 21 years to build Sterling Dynamics into something untouchable. To make herself into someone who could destroy careers with a word, close restaurants, with a phone call, demand excellence, and actually receive it. Except sometimes excellence looked like a man hanging from a beam in his apartment, leaving a note that mentioned her name. Victoria picked up her phone. Put it down, picked it up again. The reservation was in 15 minutes. She could cancel. She could stay home. She could admit that going back to the Meridian was petty revenge, a power play to prove they hadn't broken her, that she could walk into any room and own it. She could admit she was scared. No, fear was for people who had something to lose. Victoria had already lost everything that mattered. Everything else was just business. She drove herself in. The Tesla declined. The valet walked through the Meridian's entrance at exactly 7 o'clock. The hostess, Young knew, clearly hadn't been briefed, started to smile before recognizing who was standing in front of her. The smile died. Color drained from her face. Ms. Sterling, of course, right this way. The dining room fell quiet as Victoria crossed it. Not silent, but quieter, the kind of hush that spreads when predators enter the territory. Heads turned. Conversations stuttered. Someone dropped silverware. Robert Ashford materialized beside the hostess, intercepting before they reached any of the tables. His smile was professional. His eyes were terrified. Ms. Sterling, welcome back. Your table is ready. Table 12, by the window. Far enough from other diners that conversations wouldn't carry close enough that everyone could see exactly who was sitting there. Victoria sat. Robert placed a menu in front of her with hands that shook just slightly. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't acknowledge him. Simply folded her hands on the table and waited. Robert returned to the kitchen. Victoria could imagine the scene back there, servers drawing straws, arguing. Maybe flat out refusing. She'd seen it before. Fear was predictable. 5 minutes passed. Other tables received their servers. Water glasses were filled. Bread baskets appeared. Victoria's table remained untouched, an island of deliberate neglect in an ocean of service. 10 minutes. A couple 3 tables over received their appetizers. The sommelier made his rounds, carefully avoiding her section. 15 minutes. Victoria sat perfectly still, watching the theater unfold. This was psychological warfare dressed as hospitality, and everyone in the room knew it. They were making her wait, making her feel what it was like to be invisible. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd built an empire on being seen, on being impossible to ignore. And now these people, these servers and cooks and managers who made in a year what she spent on shoes, thought they could erase her through collective silence. She should leave, walk out, destroy this place with a phone call, and never think about it again. But leaving would mean they'd won, would mean James Novak's ghost had more power than her present-day empire, would mean admitting that she felt guilty, that she'd done something wrong, that a man's death was somehow her fault. Victoria stayed in her chair, waited, let them have their moment of defiance, and thought about a journal entry she'd never read in an apartment she'd never visit, written by an 8-year-old boy who understood exactly what invisibility cost. Back in the kitchen, Marcus watched through the service window as Robert returned from seating Victoria Sterling. The manager's face had gone from pale to gray stress, carving new lines around his eyes. Robert gathered the servers near the expo station. I need someone. Anyone. She's been sitting there 15 minutes. Sienna was shaking her head before he finished speaking. I can't, Robert. I physically cannot walk over there. You saw what she did to James. You were here. I know. Do you? Because James was my friend. He taught me how to break down a duck. He covered my shifts when my mom was sick. And that woman destroyed him for one mistake. Another server, Marcus, didn't know his name, mid-40s, been here longer than anyone, spoke up. It wasn't even that big a mistake. The lamb was slightly underdone. He would have fixed it. She didn't give him a chance. Robert's voice cracked. I understand, I do, but someone has to serve her. If we refuse service, corporate will fire me and shut this place down. Everyone loses their job, everyone. Silence. Marcus scrubbed a pan he'd already cleaned twice, listening to people calculate the cost of their conscience. Callum emerged from the walk-in cooler, arms full of lamb racks. I won't cook for her. I'll keep the kitchen running, but I'm not putting food on her plate. Callum. James was Sue when I started. He gave me my shot. I owe him more than I owe corporate. Robert looked around the kitchen at people studiously avoiding his gaze. Marcus recognized the expression. It was the same one his son wore when he knew something was wrong, but didn't have words to fix it. The manager's shoulders sagged. He pulled out his phone, probably to call corporate, to explain that his entire staff had mutinied and there was nothing he could do. Marcus thought about Dylan's journal, about promises made in kitchens at dawn, about standing up when standing up meant losing everything. He dried his hands on his apron, pulled it off, found a clean server's jacket hanging on a hook by the office, someone spare, too big in the shoulders but clean enough. Sienna saw him first. Marcus, what are you doing? He didn't answer. Didn't trust his voice not to shake. Just put on the jacket, straightened the collar, and pushed through the doors into the dining room. The walk to table 12 felt longer than it was. His shoes squeaked on the polished floor. Other diners glanced up, then away, sensing something was about to happen, but uncertain what. Victoria Sterling sat with her back straight, hands folded, face completely neutral. She looked like money and power wrapped in black fabric, the kind of woman who could buy and sell this restaurant without checking her bank balance. She looked alone. Marcus picked up the menu that had been left at her table and set it down in front of her. His hands didn't shake. That surprised him. Good evening. I apologize for the wait. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Victoria's eyes met his. Sharp, cold, the kind of gaze that had probably reduced boardrooms to silence. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd been stared down by Dylan's mother while she explained why leaving was easier than staying. A stranger's disapproval barely registered. Victoria studied him, took in the ill-fitting jacket, the name tag that said Tyler, the calluses on his hands that marked him as kitchen staff, not front of house. "Do you know who I am?" Her voice was quiet, controlled, expecting the answer to matter. Marcus met her eyes. "I know you're a customer who's been waiting. That's all I need to know." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. It disappeared before Marcus could be sure. "You're not a server." "Not usually, but tonight I am." "Why, Tom?" The question felt like a test. Marcus thought about several answers: because someone had to, because Robert needed help, because it was just a call and jobs needed doing. What came out was simpler, more true. Because everyone deserves to be seen. Victoria leaned back in her chair, reassessing. Marcus could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the evaluation of threat level and angle of attack. She was used to people who bent. He could tell because she was waiting for him to bend. He just stood there, waiting for her to order. "I'd like to move to that table." She pointed across the dining room to a table by the far wall. Quieter, more isolated, a power move disguised as preference. Marcus nodded once. "Of course." He pulled out her chair. She stood smoothed, her jacket, walked to the new table with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting you'd be obeyed. Marcus followed, pulled out the new chair, placed the menu down again. "Would you like water?" While you decide yes, he left, returned with water in a crystal glass, ice cubes precisely measured. Set it down without flourish. Victoria had already decided on a new test. "The salmon, I want it prepared differently from the menu." She listed specifications that made no sense together: internal temperature that required precision cooking, crispy skin that needed high heat, acid without citrus, techniques that contradicted each other. Marcus wrote it all down. "I'll talk to the kitchen." "You do that." Back through the doors into the chaos of dinner service. Callum was plating steaks, his movements sharp and efficient, controlled fury channeled into perfect sears. Marcus approached carefully. Callum's temper was legendary. Asking him to cook for Victoria Sterling was asking him to betray a dead friend. "She wants the salmon, special prep." He read off the specifications. Callum's knife stopped mid-cut. "That's impossible." "I know. She's testing you, seeing when you'll break." Marcus thought about Dylan at school, raising his hand 7 times and being ignored 7 times. About bravery that didn't work, but mattered anyway. "Then let's not break." 63 degrees internal sous vide. Torch the skin after. Vinegar powder for acid instead of citrus. "You did it with the duck last month." Callum stared at him. The kitchen had gone quiet, other cooks listening to see how this would play out. "You've been paying attention." 6 years in the pit, I watch everything." "Why aren't you a cook?" "Because my son needs me home by 6. Callum's expression shifted. Something like respect, or maybe just recognition, that Marcus had his own battles that had nothing to do with this restaurant's drama. "All right, I'll do it. For you. Not for her." Marcus returned to the dining room. Victoria had sent back her water not cold enough. He brought a new glass with more ice. She sent back the bread too warm. He brought bread from a cooler batch. Each time she tested, Marcus adjusted. No apologies beyond professional courtesy. No scrambling. Just efficient correction and the quiet knowledge that he'd promised his son he wouldn't let anyone be invisible, even if that meant serving someone who'd made another man feel exactly that way. When the salmon arrived, perfectly cooked, skin crispy, plated with precision, Victoria looked up at him with something close to confusion. "You did well, better than I expected from someone in your position." "My position?" "Dishwasher playing server." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford, but it surged anyway. "I'm not playing anything. I'm doing a job that needed doing." Victoria set down her fork, leaned back, studied him with new intensity. "Do you understand what happens to people who cross me?" "I imagine they regret it." "Then why?" "I'm not crossing you. I'm serving you dinner." And the honesty of it seemed to catch her off guard. She was used to people with angles, with agendas. Marcus had neither. He just had a promise he'd made that morning and enough stubborn pride to keep it. Victoria picked up her phone, typed something. Marcus waited. After a moment, she looked up. Marcus Webb. His name in her mouth felt like a threat. She knew who he was now, had probably found his name, his background, everything Google could tell her about a man who washed dishes in Portland. Interesting reading. Your son has selective mutism. Marcus's hands became fists. His voice stayed level through sheer force of will. That's not relevant to your dinner service. Everything's relevant when I ask. Then yes, my son has selective mutism, and I have salmon to serve to other tables. Will there be anything else? He didn't wait for her to answer, turned and walked back to the kitchen before the anger could show on his face. She'd crossed a line weaponizing Dylan against him. It was a reminder that power meant knowing where people were vulnerable and pressing exactly there. Robert caught him at the kitchen door. Marcus, my office, now. The office was small papers everywhere, the organized chaos of a manager barely keeping pace with demands. Robert closed the door, ran a hand through thinning hair. I have to suspend you, effective immediately. Marcus had known this was coming, still felt like getting punched. For serving a customer, for taking a table without authorization, for overstepping your position, for doing what you asked, someone had to serve her. I meant one of the trained servers. Not you, not without understanding what you were walking into. Marcus thought about Robert's face during the meeting. The desperation, the fear of losing everything he'd rebuilt after alcoholism had taken the first version of his life. You needed help, I helped. And now I need to show corporate that appropriate discipline was applied. If I don't suspend you, they'll think I'm not taking this seriously. What about what you said someone had to serve her or the restaurant closes? Robert's voice dropped barely audible. I know. God, Marcus, I know. But I can't protect you and keep my job. And if I lose this job, I'm done. 4 years sober and it won't matter. I'll be the drunk manager who couldn't handle pressure. Every door in this industry will close. Marcus understood then. Not just the mechanics of it, but the weight. Robert was drowning, trying to keep his head above water while everything pulled him down. Choosing Marcus was choosing himself, his sobriety, his future. It was survival math, and Marcus had been doing that math long enough to recognize it. How long? 2 weeks, unpaid. 2 weeks without pay meant choosing between rent and Dylan's therapy, meant skipping meals, meant the kind of calculations that kept Marcus awake at 3 in the morning. All right, Marcus, I understand you're doing what you have to do. He started to leave. Robert's voice stopped him. For what it's worth, you did something tonight I couldn't do. You stood up, even knowing it would cost you. Marcus didn't turn around. My son needed to know his father wasn't a coward. That's worth more than 2 weeks' pay. He pushed through the door back into the kitchen. Sienna was there, eyes wide. Robert suspended you. Yeah. That's not right. You were helping. Marcus untied his apron, hung the borrowed jacket back on its hook, started to leave. Victoria Sterling was standing in the kitchen doorway. The entire kitchen froze. Customers didn't come back here. Ever. It was health code. It was protocol. It was an unspoken rule that separated the people who ate from the people who made eating possible. But Victoria Sterling didn't care about rules she didn't write. She looked past the stations, past the shocked cooks, directly at Robert emerging from his office. What are you doing? Robert's face went white. Ms. Sterling, this is staff area. I asked what you're doing. Internal personnel matter, being addressed appropriately. Victoria's voice could have cut diamonds. You're punishing him for doing what your entire staff refused to do. He violated protocol. He provided service. Excellent service. Better than I've received at restaurants charging twice your prices. If anyone should be disciplined, it's the manager who let a customer sit alone for 15 minutes. The kitchen was silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Robert tried to recover ground. I understand your perspective, but do you, because it seems like you're punishing competence and rewarding cowardice? Is that really the message you want your staff to learn? Marcus stepped forward. His pride was screaming at him to shut up, accept the help, let the powerful woman rescue him. His self-respect had other ideas. Miss Sterling, I appreciate this, But I don't need you to fight my battles. Victoria turned to him. The look on her face was pure confusion. Excuse me. I made my choice. I'll accept the consequences. That's between me and my employer. For the first time since she'd walked in, Victoria Sterling looked uncertain. You're refusing my help. I'm saying I can handle this myself. I don't need a white knight. I need my dignity. Something passed between them. Understanding, respect, the acknowledgement that Marcus wasn't playing by the rules she was used to, where her intervention meant gratitude and submission. Victoria turned back to Robert. Then let me be clear. As a customer, I'm informing you that I received exceptional service tonight. If you choose to punish that, I'll make certain Sterling Hospitality understands exactly what kind of establishment you're running. It wasn't subtle. It was threat-wrapped in politeness power wielded with precision. But she'd also stepped back, let Marcus keep his self-respect while still protecting him. Robert nodded stiffly. Understood. Marcus, finish your shift. We'll discuss this tomorrow. Marcus looked at Victoria. She was already walking out of the kitchen heels, clicking on tile back straight every inch the woman who owned rooms just by entering them. Except she'd just fought for a dishwasher. A stranger. Someone with nothing to offer her. Marcus didn't understand it, didn't trust it, but he finished his shift, cleaned his station, and clocked out at 9:30 with the strange certainty that something had shifted tonight in ways he couldn't name yet. Robert caught him in the parking lot. She waited by the cars, your cars, said she wanted to talk to you. Marcus found her by his 15-year-old Honda, looking out of place among the employee vehicles with their dents and rust and prayers they'd start one more time. Victoria spoke without preamble. Why did you serve me when no one else would? Marcus thought about several answers. Settled on truth. This morning my son asked me why people ignore him at school. I told him being ignored doesn't mean you don't matter. It means the people ignoring you are too coward to see you. I promised him if I ever saw someone being made invisible, I wouldn't stay quiet. Victoria's expression fractured, just for a moment, then rebuilt itself into control. How old is your son? 8. She nodded slowly, seemed to be processing something that hurt. I want to do something for him. I don't want charity. It's not, she stopped, started again. I don't know what it is, but I need to do it. Marcus pulled out his phone, gave her his number against every instinct that said rich people didn't help poor people without extracting payment. Victoria saved it, looked at him one more time. You reminded me of something tonight. Someone I used to be before I forgot how. Then she got in her Tesla and drove away, leaving Marcus standing in the parking lot with the promise he'd made Dylan still sitting in his chest like a stone, except now it felt different. Lighter, like maybe keeping it had mattered after all. Marcus was halfway through the next pan when Robert appeared beside him, close enough that the words wouldn't carry to the rest of the kitchen. You should know the whole story, what you walked into tonight. The water scalded Marcus's knuckles. He adjusted the temperature without looking up. Robert's voice dropped lower, threading through the noise of tickets, printing, and oil sizzling. 6 months ago, Victoria Sterling reserved the private dining room, business dinner with Japanese investors. $40 million deal on the table. James prepared the meal himself. Lamb course perfectly seared, except he misjudged the internal temp. Came out at 138 instead of 145. 7 degrees. Barely noticeable. Marcus scrubbed harder. She noticed. Called James out from the kitchen in front of everyone. Told him his cooking was amateur. That she'd seen homeless people with better instincts. That she'd personally ensure everyone in the industry knew his name for all the wrong reasons. The pan clattered against the sink edge. The investors walked out. Deal collapsed. Local media picked it up. Tech billionaire humiliates chef over undercooked lamb. James became a punchline. His phone stopped ringing. Suppliers started asking for payment up front. 2 weeks later, building maintenance found him hanging in his apartment. Notes said he couldn't survive what she'd done to his reputation. Marcus set down the pan, turned off the water. The silence between them felt heavier than the words. You're telling me this now. You needed to understand what happened at that table, what she's capable of. Marcus thought about the woman who'd defended him 20 minutes ago. Tried to reconcile that with someone who'd destroyed a man over 7 degrees of temperature. She doesn't seem Guilty, remorseful. She's not. To her, James was incompetent. She demanded excellence and he failed. Everything after that was his choice, his weakness. She won't take responsibility for what her words did. Robert's hands shook slightly. 4 years sober, and the stress still manifested physically. Corporate made it clear we serve her or we close. But I couldn't force anyone to do it. You volunteered without knowing any of this. I should have stopped you. Why didn't you? Robert looked at him directly then, and Marcus saw the exhaustion beneath the manager's professional mask. Because I was drowning, and you threw me a rope. I took it, even though I knew it might pull you under too. Marcus picked up the next pan. Robert walked away. The confession hung in the air like grease smoke, visible and toxic and impossible to clear. At Dylan's school that morning, Mrs. Delaney had started class with vocabulary. 27 words on the board, definitions to copy, examples to create. Standard third-grade material designed to build language skills in students who hadn't yet learned that sometimes words didn't matter as much as being heard. Dylan sat in the third row, second seat from the window. His notebook was open to a fresh page pencil, ready body angled slightly forward in the posture of someone prepared to participate. Mrs. Delaney called on Travis for the first word. Resilience. Travis stumbled through the definition, got close enough that she moved on. Dylan's hand went up for the second word. Perseverance. Mrs. Delaney's eyes passed over him like he was furniture, landed on Emma 2 rows back. Third word. Dylan's hand up again, higher this time. Mrs. Delaney called on Bradley. Fourth word. Dylan stretched his arm until his shoulder ached. Mrs. Delaney called on Sophia. By the seventh word, Dylan stopped raising his hand, started drawing small circles in the margin of his notebook, instead each one slightly darker than the last. Lunch was worse. The cafeteria smelled like industrial pizza and cleaning solution. Dylan carried his tray to a table where 3 boys from his class were arguing about which superhero would win in a fight. He set his tray down at the empty end, not intruding, just existing in adjacent space. Iron Man has the tech advantage, but Thor's literally a god. Dylan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Captain America beat both of them in Civil War. The boys continued their debate without pause, as if Dylan had said nothing, as if he'd made no sound at all. He might as well have been speaking a language they couldn't hear. He ate his pizza in silence, threw away half of it because his stomach had knotted too tight to accept more. The counselor, Ms. Brennan, young enough to still believe in quick fixes, pulled Dylan aside after lunch. Your teacher is concerned. You're not participating in class. Dylan looked at his shoes. New at the start of the school year, already scuffed beyond recognition. You need to engage more. Raise your hand. Share your ideas. The other students won't know you're there if you don't speak up. Dylan wanted to scream that he'd raised his hand 7 times, that he'd tried to join the lunch conversation, that he was speaking up and nobody was listening. But the words stuck in his throat the way they always did when adults asked questions they didn't really want answered. Ms. Brennan patted his shoulder. Just try harder, okay? Put yourself out there. Dylan nodded, went back to class, pulled out his journal during independent reading time, and wrote with enough pressure that the pen nearly tore through the paper. Maybe if I'm quiet enough, I'll completely disappear. Then it won't hurt anymore. Marcus brought the replacement water glass, colder this time, ice cubes precise, and set it at Victoria's new table without comment. She was reading something on her phone posture, radiating the kind of focus that came from years of making every second productive. She looked up, tested the water with one finger against the glass. Better. Marcus nodded, started to leave. Wait. He stopped. Victoria set down her phone with deliberate care. I've changed my mind about the salmon. I want it prepared exactly as I specified earlier, but add one more requirement. The plating should be asymmetrical, off-center, nothing balanced. Marcus wrote it down. The request was designed to contradict Callum's instincts. The Irish chef was famous for his precision, his geometrically perfect plates. Asking for deliberate imbalance was asking him to fight his own nature. Anything else? You'll know if there is. Back in the kitchen, Marcus found Callum finishing a duck breast, the skin crackling and golden. He waited until the chef plated before speaking. She wants the salmon, same specifications as before, but plating needs to be asymmetrical. Callum's knife stilled midway through a garnish cut. She's mocking me. She's testing me. Through you. What's the difference? Marcus thought about Dylan's journal. About the difference between being invisible and being seen the wrong way. The difference is I don't break, which means you can't either. Callum's jaw worked. The kitchen sounds continued around them, orders firing, pans clanging, the constant percussion of dinner service. You know why I won't cook for her directly? Why I'm only doing this for you? James was my mentor. When I came here fresh off a failed stint in New York, ego destroyed, and rent 3 months overdue, he gave me a job. Taught me how to break down proteins properly. Covered for me when I showed up hungover. When he died, I couldn't even go to the funeral. Couldn't face his sister knowing I'd been here in this kitchen the night Victoria Sterling decided her deal mattered more than his dignity. Callum picked up the salmon. Started the precise work of sous vide preparation, vacuum seal water, bath temperature calibrated to the degree. But you stood up tonight when nobody else would. You served her like she was just another customer. That took guts or stupidity, haven't decided which yet. Maybe both. Yeah, maybe. 30 minutes later, the salmon emerged perfect. 63 degrees internal skin torched to crackling vinegar powder providing acid without citrus. Callum plated it with intentional asymmetry. The fish angled across white porcelain garnish, scattered like deliberate chaos. Marcus carried it to table 12, set it down without flourish. Victoria cut into the salmon, chewed slowly. Her expression revealed nothing. You did well, better than I expected from someone in your position. The words felt designed to sting. Marcus kept his face neutral. My position? Dishwasher playing server. Heat flared in Marcus's chest. 6 years of scrubbing other people's messes, watching servers make twice his wage for half his hours, being treated as interchangeable labor by management that barely knew his name. And now this woman, this stranger who'd driven a man to suicide, was reducing him to his job title like it defined his worth. I'm not playing anything. I'm doing work that needed doing. Victoria's eyes sharpened. She was enjoying this, he realized. The friction. Most people probably fell over themselves to please her. Do you understand what happens to people who cross me? Marcus thought about James Novak, about the difference between crossing someone and refusing to bow. I imagine they regret it, but I'm not crossing you. I'm serving you dinner. The honesty seemed to surprise her. Victoria set down her fork, leaned back, reassessed. What's your name? It's on the tag, Marcus. Marcus what? Does it matter? Her voice hardened. Everything matters when I ask. Pride surged against caution. Marcus felt his spine straighten, his jaw set. He'd spent years swallowing disrespect because bills needed paying and Dylan needed stability. But something about this woman's assumption that her questions deserved answers, that her curiosity gave her rights to his privacy, scraped against the part of him that remembered being more than just someone who washed dishes. Webb? Marcus Webb. Victoria pulled out her phone, typed quickly. Marcus watched her face change as she found whatever she was looking for. The calculation in her eyes shifted from assessment to something more complicated. Interesting. Says here you fought the school district for your son's educational accommodations. Selective mutism diagnosis. You represented yourself because you couldn't afford a lawyer. Marcus's hands became fists. The anger he'd kept controlled ignited fully. That has nothing to do with your dinner. Everything's connected when you're trying to understand someone. You don't need to understand me. You need to eat your salmon. He turned before she could respond, walked back to the kitchen with his pulse hammering in his ears and the knowledge that she'd just weaponized his son against him, found the most vulnerable part of his life and pressed exactly there to see what would happen. Victoria watched Marcus retreat through the kitchen doors. She should have felt satisfied she'd found his pressure point, established dominance, reminded him who held power in this interaction. Instead, she felt something uncomfortably close to shame. Her phone still showed the article. Local father fights for son's educational rights. The photo showed Marcus outside the school district offices, Dylan beside him, looking small and scared. The article detailed his months-long battle to get an IEP, approved how he'd studied special education law in the public library, how he'd presented his case to the board with documentation, proving Dylan needed support beyond what the overcrowded classroom could provide. Victoria scrolled further, found Dylan's face in a different photo school picture day, forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, the look of a child who'd learned early that the world was not kind to people who needed extra help. Something cold settled in her chest. Dylan was 8. The same age Victoria had been when her mother left when she'd stopped speaking for 6 months, when her father had been too busy working double shifts to notice his daughter was disappearing inside herself. She'd fixed it alone, decided that being perfect was safer than being vulnerable, became the best student, the most driven employee, the most ruthless executive. Built armor so thick that nothing could hurt her again, except she'd become the thing that had hurt her, the person who looked at struggle and called it weakness, who saw someone failing and decided they deserved their failure. Victoria set down her phone. The salmon was perfectly cooked. She had no appetite for it. Robert's office was barely organized chaos. Filing cabinets, overflowing schedules tacked to every available wall surface, the desk buried under invoices and vendor contracts. Marcus stood in the doorway while Robert sat with his head in his hands. "I have to suspend you. Effective immediately." The words landed with the weight of inevitability. Marcus had known this was coming from the moment Victoria had defended him. For serving a customer. Robert looked up. His face was haggard. For taking a table without authorization. For overstepping your position. For making me look incompetent in front of a woman who owns 40% of this restaurant. You asked for someone to serve her. I asked for a trained server, not someone from the pit who'd never worked front of house. Not, Robert stopped, started again. Corporate called while you were out there. Victoria's assistant informed them about the delay in service, about the staff refusing to serve her. They're sending someone tomorrow to investigate whether this restaurant is being run properly. Marcus understood then. Robert wasn't protecting the restaurant. He was protecting himself. So you're throwing me under the bus. I'm showing corporate that appropriate discipline was applied, that I took the situation seriously, that this establishment has standards. Standards that include letting a paying customer sit unserved for 15 minutes. Robert's voice broke on the edges. You think I wanted this? You think I'm proud of sacrificing you to save my own job? I think you're doing what you have to do, same as everyone else. Robert stood, walked to the small window that overlooked the parking lot. His reflection in the glass showed a man who'd aged a decade in 6 months. 4 years ago, I was sleeping in my car, lost my GM position at a steakhouse in Seattle because I showed up drunk 3 days in a row, lost my apartment because I spent rent money on whiskey, lost my wife because she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. AA meetings and 90 days in rehab and a year of working food trucks before anyone would give me another shot. Marcus stayed silent. This job is everything. It's proof I'm not that person anymore. Proof I can handle pressure without reaching for a bottle. If I lose this, I'm done. Not just in Portland, everywhere. Word spreads. The manager who couldn't control his staff, the drunk who relapsed under stress. Every door closes. Robert turned from the window. I know what it's like to be invisible, to walk into rooms and watch people decide you're not worth seeing because they've already written you off as a failure. You stood up tonight for someone being ignored. I'm asking you to understand why I can't do the same for you. Marcus thought about Dylan's journal, about promises that cost more than expected. How long? 2 weeks, unpaid. 2 weeks meant the rent would be late, meant skipping Dylan's next therapy session, meant choosing between electricity and groceries and hoping he chose right. Okay, Marcus, you're doing what you need to survive. I get it. He started to leave. Robert's voice stopped him. What you did tonight, serving her when nobody else would, that took courage, I don't have anymore. I want you to know I see that, even if I can't protect you from the consequences. Marcus nodded, didn't trust his voice not to break if he spoke. He pushed through the door back into the kitchen. Sienna was waiting, her eyes still red from earlier tears. Robert suspended you. Yeah, that's wrong. You were helping. You did what he asked. He did what corporate required. Can't blame him for choosing survival. Marcus started untying his apron. His shift was technically over anyway. Victoria Sterling walked through the kitchen door. The violation of space was immediate and total. Customers never came back here. It was health code, it was protocol, it was the unspoken boundary between the people who consumed and the people who created. But Victoria moved through the kitchen like she owned it, which Marcus supposed she partially did. She ignored the gaping cooks, ignored Callum's murderous glare, walked directly to Robert, who'd emerged from his office, looking like he might faint. "What are you doing?" Robert's professional mask slipped. Fear replaced it. "Ms. Sterling, this is a staff-only area. I asked what you're doing." Addressing an internal personnel matter appropriately. Victoria's voice could have flash frozen the soup station. "You're punishing him for doing what your entire staff refused to do. He violated established protocol. He provided service. Exceptional service. The kind of service that separates restaurants that survive from restaurants that close. If anyone should be disciplined, it's the manager who allowed a customer to be ignored for 15 minutes. The kitchen had gone silent. Every cook, every prep worker, every person who had spent the evening pretending this wasn't happening, now had front row seats to Victoria Sterling defending a dishwasher against their manager. Robert tried to salvage the situation. "I understand your perspective, but company policy says provide excellent customer service." That's exactly what he did. "Are you seriously going to punish that?" Marcus stepped forward. Pride overrode survival instinct. "Ms. Sterling, I appreciate this, but I don't need you to fight my battles." Victoria turned. The confusion on her face was genuine. "Excuse me. I made my choice knowing there would be consequences. I'll accept them. This is between me and my employer. I don't need someone to rescue me." The words came out harder than intended. Marcus saw Sienna's eyes widen, saw Callum's barely suppressed grin, saw Robert's face cycle through relief and terror. Victoria studied him like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "You're refusing my help." "I'm saying I can handle this myself. I have dignity. I'd like to keep it." Something shifted in her expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition that Marcus wasn't following the script she was used to, where her intervention meant automatic gratitude and submission. She turned back to Robert. Her voice was colder now, more calculated. "Let me be clear, Mr. Ashford. As a customer, I'm informing you that I received exceptional service tonight. Professional, attentive, exactly what one expects from an establishment of this caliber. If you choose to punish that level of performance, I'll ensure Sterling, Hospitality's board, understands precisely how you manage your staff." The threat was unsubtle. Robert's face went gray. "I hear you, Ms. Sterling. Marcus, finish your shift. We'll discuss this tomorrow." Victoria walked out without another word. The kitchen slowly resumed breathing. Sienna touched Marcus's arm. "You just told Victoria Sterling you didn't need her help." "Yeah. Nobody does that. People beg for her help. They trade favors and connections and whatever else she wants just to get her attention." Marcus pulled off his apron. Then maybe somebody needed to remind her that not everything's for sale. He clocked out at 9:30. The parking lot was mostly empty, just employee vehicles and the last few customer cars. Marcus was halfway to his Honda when he saw her. Victoria stood beside her Tesla, arms crossed, looking out of place among the aging sedans and pickup trucks that served as transportation for people who counted quarters. "I need to understand something." Marcus stopped, exhausted and angry, and completely unprepared for whatever this was. "Why did you serve me when no one else would?" The question felt genuine, like she actually wanted to know. Marcus thought about lying, making it about duty or professionalism, or any of the acceptable reasons someone might do their job despite personal feelings. What came out was truth. "This morning my son asked me why people ignore him at school. I told him being ignored doesn't mean he doesn't matter. It means that people ignoring him are too cowardly to see him. I promised him that if I ever saw someone being made invisible, I wouldn't stay silent." Victoria's face did something complicated. Pain and recognition and something harder to name. "You served me because of your son. I served you because I promised him I'd be brave. I can't teach him courage if I don't have it myself." The parking lot lights hummed. Traffic passed on the street beyond. Victoria seemed to be processing something that didn't compute. "How old is your son?" "8. The number hit her visibly. She looked away. "I was 8 when my mother left. Told my father I was too much work, not enough reward. Walked out and never looked back. Marcus hadn't expected that. Vulnerability from someone who'd spent the evening testing his breaking point felt incongruous. I stopped speaking for 6 months after she left. Selective mutism, though nobody called it that in the 90s. My father worked construction double shifts to keep the apartment. Didn't notice I'd gone silent. Teachers thought I was shy. Classmates forgot I existed. Victoria's hands unclenched, reclenched. The motion looked involuntary. I fixed it myself. Decided being perfect was safer than being vulnerable. Top grades, best scores. Never gave anyone a reason to overlook me again. Marcus understood where this was going, saw the shape of it in her rigid posture. And you built a company on that, on never being powerless. I built an empire in demanding excellence, on refusing to accept mediocrity. If people can't meet my standards, that's their failure, not mine. The defensiveness was a wall. Marcus recognized it because he'd built similar walls around his own vulnerabilities. James Novak was incompetent. I didn't say he wasn't. Victoria stopped, looked at him. I don't know enough about cooking to judge whether he was incompetent. What I know is a man died. And everyone in that building is carrying the weight of that, including you. Her face went carefully blank. I didn't kill him. No, but you're not sleeping, either are you. The question landed like a physical blow. Victoria's composure fractured completely for 3 seconds before she rebuilt it. That's none of your business. You made my son your business when you looked him up on your phone. Seems fair to return the observation. Silence stretched. Victoria's hands were shaking slightly. She shoved them in her pockets. I built everything by demanding perfection. Excellence. If I soften now, everything I've created falls apart. Marcus thought about Dylan raising his hand 7 times and being ignored 7 times. About the difference between demanding excellence and crushing people. There's a difference between demanding excellence and destroying people who fail to meet it. My son's teacher demands excellence. She just forgets to see him while she's doing it. Victoria's voice dropped to barely audible. How do you do it? Serve someone everyone hates. I didn't serve someone everyone hates. I served someone everyone's afraid of. There's a difference. She looked up sharply. What difference? Hate means they know you. Fear means they don't. Everyone in that restaurant is afraid of you because they don't understand you. They just know you have power and you've used it to hurt people. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. And are you afraid of me? Marcus considered the question honestly. No, I'm wary. You're dangerous, but I'm not afraid. Why not? Because I've already lost everything that mattered. My wife left. My son barely speaks. I wash dishes for a living and can barely afford his therapy. You can fire me, blacklist me, make my life harder. But you can't make it worse than it already is. That gives me freedom you don't have. The truth of it seemed to stun her. Victoria leaned against her car, and for the first time all evening, she looked less like a billionaire and more like a woman who was very, very tired. I spent 20 years making sure I was never invisible again. I became so visible that I blinded myself to everyone else. The admission felt raw, unplanned. Marcus sensed this wasn't a conversation she'd intended to have. But you can see now, that's something. I'm trying, some days are better than others. A car passed on the street. The moment stretched. I want to do something for your son. Marcus's guard went up immediately. I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's... Victoria stopped, seemed to be searching for words that fit something she didn't fully understand herself. I saw his photo in that article. He looks the way I felt at 8. Invisible. Like he's disappearing and nobody notices enough to care. I can't go back and fix what happened to me. But maybe I can help him. Marcus wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it. But he thought about Dylan's journal about the way his son was slowly erasing himself and knew that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. What are you offering? Let me think about it. I need to figure out what help looks like that doesn't come with strings. She pulled out her phone. Your number. Marcus hesitated. Giving Victoria Sterling access felt dangerous, but he'd already crossed so many lines tonight that one more hardly mattered. He gave her the number. She saved it. You reminded me of something tonight. Someone I used to be before I forgot how. Victoria opened her car door, paused. Your son is lucky, having a father who stands up even when it cost him everything. He doesn't feel lucky. No, but he will, eventually. She drove away. Marcus stood in the parking lot watching her taillights disappear, trying to process what had just happened. A billionaire who'd destroyed a man 6 months ago had just asked for his phone number and promised to help his son. It made no sense. Unless Victoria Sterling was exactly as lost as everyone she'd made invisible. Unless being seen had nothing to do with power and everything to do with being known. Marcus got in his Honda, started the engine on the third try, drove home with the knowledge that he'd just made a promise to Dylan come true in the strangest way possible and had no idea what it would cost him tomorrow. Victoria's penthouse was 40 floors above the city glass walls on 3 sides, offering views she'd stopped noticing years ago. The lights below moved like blood through arteries, constant circulation that never quite reached the heart. She stood at the window with bourbon she hadn't tasted and sleeping pills she'd already swallowed too when the prescription said one watching Portland, pretend to sleep. 11 p.m. Her laptop sat open on the granite counter, search results still glowing. Marcus Webb had a digital footprint smaller than most teenagers. No social media, no professional networking profiles. Just traces a school district meeting, minutes mentioning his name, a local news article about parent advocacy, public records, showing an apartment rental in a neighborhood where sirens were background noise. She dug deeper, found the divorce filing from 3 years ago. Jennifer Webb had filed on grounds of irreconcilable differences, requesting full custody initially before settling for Marcus having primary placement. The court documents were sparse, but telling mother relocated to San Diego 6 months post-divorce, remarried within a year, visited Dylan twice since. Victoria pulled up the advocacy article again. The photo showed Marcus outside the school district offices, Dylan pressed against his side, both of them looking like they'd just survived a battle and knew more were coming. The article detailed Marcus's 8-month fight for an individualized education plan, how he'd researched special education law at the public library, how he'd presented documentation to the board proving Dylan needed support beyond what an overcrowded classroom could provide, how he'd won barely and only after threatening legal action he couldn't afford. The school was listed in the article. Washington Elementary. Victoria searched it. Test scores below state average. 34 students per class. Budget cuts every year since 2020. Teachers stretched so thin they could barely manage the curriculum, let alone notice which students were disappearing. She found Mrs. Delaney's profile on the school website. 15 years teaching 3rd grade. Probably exhausted. Probably doing her best with resources that weren't enough. Probably had no idea one of her students was erasing himself in real time. Victoria's chest tightened. She recognized that erasure. Had felt it at 8 when her mother packed 2 suitcases and walked out saying Victoria was work without reward. Had felt it for 6 months while her father worked construction doubles and came home too tired to notice his daughter had stopped speaking. Had felt it at school when teachers marked her absent even when she was sitting right there. She'd fixed it by becoming unforgettable. Top grades, perfect scores, achievements that made invisibility impossible. And somewhere in that transformation from wounded child to armored adult, she'd forgotten what it cost to be seen the wrong way, as threat, as weapon, as someone whose attention meant danger. Her phone buzzed. Email from her assistant. The Times piece would run tomorrow morning. Victoria clicked through to the draft they'd been sent. The headline was exactly what Kimberly had warned. The ice queen who broke a chef 6 months after James Novak's death, Victoria Sterling returns to the scene. The article was thorough. Quoted former employees calling her demanding, ruthless, impossible to satisfy. Detailed the incident, Victoria's public evisceration of Novak over undercooked lamb, the investors who walked the deal that collapsed the media attention that followed. Mentioned Novak's suicide note. Listed previous instances where Victoria had destroyed professional relationships over perceived failures. It painted her as exactly what she was. Someone who'd turned survival instincts into corporate philosophy. Who'd weaponized her fear of powerlessness until everyone around her was afraid. Victoria closed the laptop. The bourbon tasted bitter. The pills were starting to work, making her thoughts syrupy and slow. She should sleep, should let the medication do its job and deal with it tomorrow when it arrived. Instead, she thought about Marcus Webb standing in a parking lot saying he wasn't afraid of her because he'd already lost everything, about the freedom that came from having nothing left to take, about how she'd spent 20 years accumulating power to prevent loss, and he'd spent 6 years accepting loss to protect what mattered. She didn't understand it, but she wanted to. The Meridian looked different in afternoon light, less elegant, more exposed. Victoria walked through the entrance at 2 p.m. wearing business casual instead of her usual armor. The hostess, different from last night, older, smiled professionally until recognition dawned. Ms. Sterling, we weren't expecting. I need to speak with Marcus Webb. Is he working today? The hostess's smile went uncertain. I believe he's on suspension. Let me get Mr. Ashford. Robert appeared within 30 seconds, moving fast enough to suggest he'd been watching the door. His professional mask was firmly in place, but Victoria saw the calculation behind it, trying to determine if this was attack or something else. Ms. Sterling, how can I help you? I need Marcus Webb's contact information. Robert's expression flickered. Surprise, concern, the reflexive wariness of someone who'd learned that powerful people asking questions meant trouble. I'm not sure I can provide employee information without. Then get him here. Call him. Tell him I want to speak with him. He's suspended. I can't ask him to come in on. Victoria pulled out her phone, started typing. Would you prefer I call Sterling Hospitality's regional director and explain why I'm being stonewalled? Robert's jaw tightened. He pulled out his own phone, made the call while Victoria waited, watching the dining room staff set up for dinner service, everyone moving with the choreographed precision of people who knew their jobs depended on not making mistakes. 15 minutes later, Marcus walked through the kitchen door. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, civilian clothes that made him look younger and more tired. His eyes found Victoria immediately. You asked for me. I have a proposal. Is there somewhere private we can talk? Robert gestured toward his office. Marcus followed Victoria inside, and she noticed how he kept the door partially open. Not quite trusting, not quite afraid, just careful. Victoria didn't waste time. Sterling Dynamics has an educational foundation. Scholarships grant support for students from underprivileged backgrounds. I want to offer your son a full scholarship to Pacific Academy. Marcus's face went carefully neutral. What's Pacific Academy? Private school specializing in communication disorders. 12 students per class, speech therapists on staff, teachers trained in selective mutism intervention. Your son would be seen there. Actually seen. The words hung between them. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Why? Because I saw his photo and recognized something. And because I can help. People don't help for free. What do you want? Victoria had expected the suspicion, had prepared an answer. I want you to work for Sterling Dynamics. Hospitality consultant. Better pay than you're making here. Normal hours health insurance that actually covers therapy. Doing what? Teaching my executives what you understand about service, about seeing people instead of resources, about the difference between demanding excellence and destroying morale. Marcus was quiet. Victoria could see him processing, looking for the trap. The scholarship. How much does it cost? $30,000 annually, fully covered. Books, materials, therapy sessions. And in exchange, I work for you. You work for yourself. I'm just the one paying you to do it. Marcus's hands were fists in his pockets, the defensive posture of someone who'd been offered help before and learned it came with hooks. I need to think about it. Of course, but I need an answer soon. Pacific Academy's mid-year admission window closes in 2 weeks. Marcus pushed off the wall, started toward the door, stopped. Why are you really doing this? Victoria met his eyes. Because I saw myself in your son. The 8-year-old version who stopped speaking after my mother left, who learned that being invisible hurt less than being seen and rejected. I can't go back and fix what happened to me, but maybe I can keep it from happening to him. The honesty surprised her. She hadn't planned to reveal that much. Marcus studied her face like he was trying to read a language he didn't quite speak. I'll call you tomorrow. He left. Victoria remained in Robert's cramped office, wondering why helping felt more terrifying than destroying ever had. The call came at 6 p.m. Victoria was in her home office reviewing acquisition proposals when Marcus's number appeared. I have conditions. No greeting, straight to business. Victoria appreciated that. I'm listening. The scholarship goes to Dylan and one other student from his school. You don't choose who. The teacher selects based on need. Two kids get out, not just mine. Victoria hadn't expected that. Most people grabbed help when offered and didn't look back. That doubles the pay them. I know. If you're not willing, I'll find another way to help Dylan myself. The stubbornness in his voice was pure steel. Victoria found herself smiling. What else? The job. I don't want to just consult. I want to build something. A training program that hires people from backgrounds like mine, people without degrees, people who've been dishwashers and line cooks and servers, and creates actual career pathways. Not charity, real jobs with advancement. That's not what I offered. Then I don't accept. I won't be your token success story while everyone else stays invisible. Victoria leaned back in her chair. 20 years of negotiations, and Marcus Webb was the first person to counter her initial offer with demands that made his help contingent on helping others. You realize you're bargaining from a position of weakness. I'm bargaining from a position of knowing what I can live with. Money without dignity isn't worth having. She thought about that, about the empire she'd built trading dignity for power, about whether accumulating both was possible. Deal. 2 scholarships, training program with your specifications. You start Monday. Silence on the other end. Then, you're serious. I don't make offers I'm not prepared to follow through on. What about Robert? I'm still suspended from the Meridian. You don't work there anymore. You work for me. I'll handle Robert. More silence. Victoria waited. My son. He's going to have questions about why some stranger is suddenly helping us. Tell him the truth, that his father stood up for someone being made invisible, and it reminded me that seeing people matters. He might not understand that. He will, eventually. Marcus exhaled. It sounded like surrender and relief mixed together. Monday, I'll be there. The call ended. Victoria sat in her office as dust turned Portland's skyline into silhouettes and thought about how strange it was that helping someone cost more effort than hurting them ever had. Pacific Academy occupied a converted house in northeast Portland, all hardwood floors and natural light, nothing like the institutional buildings Dylan was used to. Marcus held his hand walking up the steps for the first day, feeling Dylan's fingers squeezed tight enough to hurt. 3 months had passed since the phone call. 3 months of paperwork and meetings and Dylan's wide-eyed disbelief that he was leaving Washington Elementary. The second scholarship had gone to Eloise Hartley, 8-year-old daughter of the cafeteria worker. Same invisible child in a different row. Mr. Whitmore met them at the door. 40-year-old warm smile handshake that included Dylan instead of going over his head. Dylan, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Dylan pressed against Marcus's leg. Whitmore crouched to eye level. I know new schools are scary. I know talking is hard sometimes. That's okay here. We have lots of ways to communicate. You can speak when you're ready. Until then, we listen with more than our ears. He handed Dylan a small whiteboard and marker. Your classroom is upstairs. Ms. Sarah has 12 other students waiting to meet you. Some of them talk a lot, some talk a little, some don't talk at all yet. Every kind of communication is valued here. Dylan looked up at Marcus. The question in his eyes was clear. Is this real? Marcus squeezed his shoulder. It's real. I'll pick you up at 3. Whitmore led Dylan upstairs. Marcus watched them go, his son's small frame disappearing around the corner, and felt something in his chest unlock slightly. Not hope exactly, more like the absence of constant dread. Week 4. Dylan spoke his first complete sentence to the speech therapist. Marcus got the call at work, his new office at Sterling Dynamics, where the title on his door said Director of Inclusion Initiatives, and the work involved interviewing candidates from backgrounds corporate America usually ignored. He said, I like drawing dinosaurs. Full sentence, clear pronunciation. Then went silent again, but it's progress. Week 8. Dylan volunteered an answer in class, wrote it on his whiteboard. The water cycle has 3 parts. Ms. Sarah read it aloud, and the class responded with encouragement instead of judgment. Dylan didn't speak, but he smiled. Marcus saw it when he picked him up, the difference between a child performing happiness and a child experiencing it. Week 12. Drop-off was routine now. Dylan had walked into the building without needing his hand held. At pickup, he waited by the door with another boy, both of them bent over a shared comic book. The other boy was talking. Dylan was listening, nodding present. Dad, this is Henry. He likes Spider-Man 2. 2 sentences, unprompted, directed at Marcus like it was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus's throat went tight. Nice to meet you, Henry. That night, Dylan's homework included a writing assignment. Describe someone who helped you this year. Dylan wrote about a woman named Victoria who gave him a chance to be seen, who made his school small enough that teachers remembered his name, who made it possible for his dad to smile more. Marcus read it 3 times, put it in a folder he was saving for when Dylan was older and could understand what it meant that a stranger had cared enough to change their lives. At Washington Elementary, Mrs. Delaney stared at the empty desks where Dylan and Eloise used to sit. 2 students gone to a private school she'd never heard of, both of them kids she'd barely noticed until the paperwork came through requesting records transfer. She thought about Dylan's hand going up unanswered, about Eloise sitting alone at lunch, about the 32 other students still in her classroom, and wondered how many of them were disappearing while she focused on test scores and curriculum requirements and all the metrics that measured everything except whether children felt seen. Sterling Dynamics' quarterly board meeting had the energy of an execution. 12 executives around polished mahogany financial reports projected on screens, everyone waiting to see what Victoria would do about the numbers. The CFO, Gerald Trask, 56, loyal to spreadsheets above humanity, presented the restructuring proposal with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. 400 positions eliminated from support divisions, customer service, IT support facilities. The reduction saves 22%, annually increases profit margins, positions us favorably for the next acquisition. Charts appeared. Projections showed stock price climbing. The math was clean. Victoria listened without expression. Marcus sat 3 seats down, invited to this meeting specifically for what was coming. He'd spent the last month interviewing the people Gerald wanted to eliminate. Knew their names, knew their stories, knew which ones were single parents and which ones were supporting elderly relatives and which ones had been with the company since before Victoria made her first billion. Gerald continued, the positions are redundant. Automation handles most of their functions now. Keeping them is inefficient. The board has approved similar restructuring 3 times previously. One of the board members, Sandra of Voss hedge fund background, cared about quarterly earnings above everything, nodded approvingly. The shareholders will respond well, especially with the Times piece still circulating. Shows we're focused on business fundamentals. Another board member murmured agreement. Victoria remained silent. Gerald wrapped up. I recommend we vote today. Implementation begins next week. Severance packages are minimal, but legal. Questions? Victoria set down her pen. No. The room went still. Gerald blinked. I'm sorry. Oh, no, we're not eliminating 400 positions. Gerald's professional composure slipped. Victoria, the numbers are clear. The numbers show profit. They don't show people. We're not doing this. Sandra leaned forward. With respect, this is sound business strategy. Every competitor has made similar cuts. We can't stay competitive if we're carrying unnecessary overhead. Victoria's voice was ice over steel. Those 400 positions represent people who keep this company running while everyone at this table takes credit. They're not overhead, they're the foundation, and I'm not destroying that foundation for a stock price bump. Gerald tried again. If we don't optimize, I'm not finished. The room went silent. Here's what we're doing instead. Executive compensation gets cut by 30%. That includes me. No bonuses this year, no stock options. We reduce middle management by restructuring bloated departments that duplicate work. We keep support staff and invest in actual training programs that create advancement opportunities. The board erupted. Voices overlapped. This is unprecedented. Shareholders will revolt, will be seen as weak. Victoria raised her hand. The room quieted. We built this company on innovation, on seeing opportunities others missed. When did we stop innovating in how we treat our own people? Marcus spoke for the first time. May I? Victoria nodded. Marcus stood pulling up his own presentation data he'd compiled over 4 months of interviews and research. Employee retention rates in hospitality and service industries. Companies that invest in visible career pathways have 60% less turnover. Training costs for new employees average $12,000 per person. High turnover costs more than retention. The 400 people you want to eliminate, they have institutional knowledge worth more than their salaries. He clicked to the next slide. Case studies from competitors who'd made similar cuts and seen productivity drop. In the kitchen where I used to work, we had a saying, use every part of the ingredient, don't waste. You're proposing we throw away our best ingredients because the easy way to cut costs is to cut people. That's not innovation, that's lazy. The metaphor landed harder than corporate jargon would have. Sandra's face tightened. You're comparing people to ingredients. I'm saying treating people like disposable resources costs more than investing in them. But you already know that. You just don't care because the cost shows up in metrics you don't measure. Gerald's face was red. This is highly inappropriate. Victoria cut him off. Marcus is here because I asked him to be. Because he understands something the rest of you have forgotten. Excellence isn't about cutting everything that doesn't immediately increase profit. It's about building systems that make people want to stay, want to contribute, want to be part of something that values them. She stood. Vote if you need to. But understand this, I built Sterling Dynamics from nothing. I own controlling interest. And I'm done building empires on invisible people. We keep the support staff. We cut executive compensation. We restructure intelligently instead of brutally. Anyone who can't support that is welcome to resign. The silence was absolute. Sandra spoke carefully. You're serious. I'm always serious. The shareholders will see a company that prioritizes sustainable growth over short-term gains, that values institutional knowledge, that treats employees like assets worth developing instead of expenses worth eliminating. Gerald tried one more time. Victoria, this is emotional thinking. Business requires understanding that high turnover, low morale, and constant restructuring cost more than loyal employees who know their work matters. I'm not being emotional, I'm being strategic. You're just used to strategy that doesn't include caring whether people survive it. The vote was 6-5 in favor of Victoria's plan, close enough to hurt, clear enough to win. After the meeting, Sandra cornered Victoria in the hallway. That was political suicide. The street will crucify you. Victoria met her eyes. Then I'll be crucified. But I'll do it knowing I didn't destroy 400 lives to make rich people richer. Marcus appeared beside us as Sandra walked away. You almost lost. I know, but I tried. That's what matters. They walked toward the elevators. Marcus's phone buzzed text from Dylan's school. Picture attached. Dylan and 3 other students presenting a group project, all of them smiling. Dylan's mouth opened mid-sentence. Marcus showed Victoria. He's speaking in class now, not all the time, but enough. Victoria studied the photo. Dylan looked like a different child from the one in the advocacy article. Still small, still careful, but present in a way he hadn't been before. You did that, standing up at the Meridian. It started everything. Marcus shook his head. You did it, offering help that didn't require him to be anyone except himself. The elevator arrived. They rode down in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd started as stranger and customer and become something harder to define. Not quite friends, not quite colleagues, something built on mutual recognition of what it cost to be seen. The Meridian had closed its dining room for the memorial. 6 months to the day after James Novak's death, his family gathered with the staff who'd worked beside him, and the space felt both too large and too small for the grief it contained. Robert stood near the bar, sober and shaking. Sienna had brought flowers. Callum wore the chef's whites James had given him when he'd first started. The absence was louder than any presence could be. Victoria arrived at exactly 7 p.m. She'd debated coming, had written and deleted 3 emails explaining why she couldn't attend, had finally accepted that avoiding this meant avoiding accountability, and she'd spent 6 months learning that accountability was the price of trying to be better. The room went quiet when she entered. Not hostile exactly, just wary. She was the person who had set everything in motion, and nobody had forgotten that. Robert approached first. Miss Sterling, thank you for coming. His voice was careful, professional, the voice of someone who'd practiced neutrality until it became reflex. Victoria nodded, looked past him to the table in the corner, where James's sister sat with his parents. Older couple faces carved with loss, the kind of grief that never quite faded. "May I speak?" Robert hesitated, looked toward James's sister, Amanda, 34, who'd been the one to find his body, and waited for permission that came as a slight nod. Victoria walked to the front of the room. No notes, no preparation, just truth she'd been carrying for 6 months. "I can't undo what happened. James Novak died, and my words were part of that story. I've told myself I did nothing wrong, that demanding excellence isn't cruelty, that his response was his choice, his weakness, his fault." Her voice remained steady through discipline alone. "I was lying, to you, to myself, about what it means to wield power, about the difference between criticism and destruction. I saw James as an obstacle to my success, treated him like his failure mattered more than his humanity. And when he couldn't survive, that I blamed him instead of examining what I'd done." Someone in the back shifted. Sienna was crying quietly. "I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm stating fact. I failed, not just professionally but morally. I took someone's worst moment and made it public, made it permanent, made it impossible for him to recover from." Victoria looked directly at Amanda. "Your brother loved cooking, treated it like art, cared about every plate that left his kitchen. I reduced that passion to profit margins and dismissed him when he fell short. That was my failure, not his." Amanda's face was carved from stone. No tears, no softness, just the hard stare of someone deciding whether to accept anything Victoria offered. Victoria continued, "I'm establishing the James Novak Excellence Fellowship, annual grants for hospitality workers pursuing education. Not to make up for what happened, nothing can do that, but to honor what James represented. Dedication to craft, commitment to excellence that came from passion, not fear." She pulled out an envelope, set it on the table beside Amanda. "First year's funding, $50,000. Your family decides how to distribute it. I'll fund it annually, no strings, no publicity, just acknowledgement that James Novak mattered." Amanda picked up the envelope, looked inside, set it down. "This doesn't bring him back. I know. It doesn't make what you did acceptable." "I know that too." Amanda's voice was raw. "Then why are you here?" "Because running away would be easier, and I'm trying to learn that easy and right aren't the same thing." The silence stretched. Finally, Amanda nodded once. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement that Victoria had shown up. Victoria returned to the back of the room. Robert continued the memorial. People shared stories, James teaching new cooks knife skills, James covering shifts, James bringing pastries he'd made at home to share. A picture emerged of someone, loved someone, missed someone whose absence had carved a hole that wouldn't heal. When it ended, Victoria slipped out quietly, found Marcus waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his Honda in the dusk. "You came. You invited me. I didn't think you would." Marcus straightened. "Dylan wrote about you for his homework, about how you gave him a chance to be seen. Seemed like I should show up when you were trying to do the same thing for James." They walked back into the restaurant. The memorial had transitioned to something softer, people sharing food, remembering together the communal grief that made loss bearable. Victoria found herself at table 12, the table where everything had started, where she'd destroyed James, where Marcus had served her despite knowing what she'd done. Marcus sat down across from her without asking. Usually people ask before joining someone's table. "You taught me rules are flexible when it matters." Victoria almost smiled. "How's Dylan?" "He gave his first oral presentation yesterday about invisible people in history, Harriet Tubman, Rosalind Franklin, people who did extraordinary things but were overlooked. He said being invisible doesn't mean you don't matter. It means the people not seeing you need to look harder." Victoria felt something crack in her chest. He's wiser than most adults. He learned from someone who looked harder when nobody else would. The weight of that settled between them. Victoria thought about the promise Marcus had made his son, about how keeping it had changed her life. "The training program you proposed. We're starting the pilot next month. 10 positions, entry level to management track. I heard. I've been interviewing candidates. I want you to interview me too." Marcus frowned. "For what?" for the position of someone who listens. I'm not good at it yet, but I want to be. Understanding dawned on his face. This wasn't about the program. This was about Victoria acknowledging she still had work to do. You're serious. I don't make offers I'm not prepared to follow through on. Marcus leaned back, studied her in the dim light. Dinner, Friday, somewhere quieter than this. Victoria hadn't expected that. Felt something flutter nervously in her chest that she couldn't name. That's an invitation. It's a step, if you're interested. She thought about all the reasons to say no. The power imbalance, the history, the fact that she'd spent 6 months learning to be human again, and dating someone felt like advanced coursework she wasn't ready for. I'm interested. No business talk, no problem solving, just dinner. Two people getting to know each other without agendas. I don't know if I remember how to do that. Marcus stood, extended his hand to help her up. Then we'll figure it out together. His hand was warm, calloused from years of work that left marks. Victoria took it, let him pull her to her feet, held on a moment longer than necessary because it felt like crossing a threshold she'd been circling for months. 1 year later, and Dylan no longer had nightmares every week, just occasionally. Manageable. Marcus still woke when they happened, still went to his son's room, still waited while Dylan came back from whatever darkness sleep had taken him to. But the journal entries had changed, less about being invisible, more about projects and friends and things learned. Dylan's handwriting had improved. His vocabulary had expanded. He spoke in class regularly now, though still carefully still, choosing moments instead of filling silence. Pacific Academy's spring showcase had him presenting on adaptive communication. Dylan stood in front of parents and teachers, explaining how some people spoke with words, and some with actions, and some with silence that meant more than noise. He stumbled twice, caught himself, finished strong. Marcus watched from the audience beside Victoria, who'd attended despite having no official connection to the school beyond funding scholarships. She'd started coming to Dylan's events 3 months ago, started joining them for dinner twice a week, started becoming part of their lives in ways that felt natural instead of forced. They were careful, slow. Marcus still carried wariness about women who left. Victoria still carried armor against vulnerability, but they were trying, and trying mattered more than perfection. At Sterling Dynamics, the inclusion program had hired 47 people in its first year. Former servers became project managers. Kitchen workers became operations analysts. People with experience instead of degrees, skills instead of credentials, potential that traditional hiring processes missed. Sienna Barrett was in the second cohort pursuing hospitality management while working full-time. Robert Ashford had celebrated 5 years sober and gotten promoted to regional manager. Callum Brennan was opening his own restaurant, small-focused, built on the principle that excellence meant seeing people, not just serving them. The Times ran a follow-up piece, From Ice Queen to Inclusive Victoria Sterling's Transformation Year. It was less hostile than the first article, still skeptical, still watching to see if the changes were real or performance. Victoria kept the article in her desk drawer. Read it when doubt crept in. Reminded herself that transformation wasn't a destination. It was ongoing work that required showing up daily. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, Dylan's careful handwriting on the envelope. Marcus brought it to their Friday dinner, a routine now this weekly meal, where they talked about everything except work. He wanted me to give you this. Victoria opened it carefully. Dear Miss Sterling, my dad says you helped us when you didn't have to. I want you to know something. That day you met my dad, I wrote in my journal that I wished I could disappear. But now I don't want to disappear anymore. I want to be seen. And I want to help other people be seen too. When I grow up, I want to be like my dad. And I think you want to be like him too. That's okay. He's pretty great. Your friend Dylan Webb, P.S. My dad says it's okay to be a work in progress. You're doing good. Victoria read it 3 times, her vision blurred on the second reading. By the third, she'd stopped pretending the tears weren't there. Marcus waited, didn't offer comfort or try to fix, just sat with her while she processed what it meant that an 8-year-old had seen her clearly enough to offer grace. He's right, you know, about being a work in progress. Victoria folded the letter carefully, put it in her purse. I'm keeping this. I figured you would. What did you tell him about us? Marcus considered the question. I told him you're someone who made mistakes and is trying to fix them, that you're learning to see people the way he needed to be seen, that we're all figuring things out as we go. That's generous. It's accurate. They finished dinner. Marcus drove her back to her building, walked her to the entrance like he always did, this careful courtship that honored boundaries while slowly dismantling them. Next week, Dylan has a field trip to the Science Museum. He asked if you wanted to come. Victoria felt panic and pleasure war in her chest. Meeting someone for dinner was one thing. Attending their child's school event was statement-making. Are you sure? I'm sure. I'm tired of being careful. I'm sure you make me want to risk getting hurt again. I'm sure Dylan likes you, and my opinion of you matters more than anyone else's. He kissed her, gentle, brief, the kind of first kiss that promised more when they were both ready. Victoria kissed him back, pulled away before it could deepen. The museum. What time? 9 a.m. Saturday. Bring comfortable shoes. 8-year-olds walk faster than you'd think. She watched him drive away. Rode the elevator to her penthouse. The glass walls reflected Portland's lights, and for the first time in years, the view felt less like isolation and more like perspective. Her laptop showed unread emails. Board meeting agenda for Monday. Acquisition proposal that needed review. The constant churn of business that never quite stopped. Victoria ignored it, took out Dylan's letter instead. Read it again. You're doing good. Not perfect, not fixed, just good. Making progress. Trying. She thought about Table 12 at the Meridian. About how 6 months ago she'd sat there alone while everyone avoided her, and Marcus Webb had broken that silence by treating her like she was just another customer worth serving. About how that one act of seeing her, not the power or money or reputation, just the person underneath, had cracked something open that she'd spent 20 years sealing shut. Last week she'd had dinner at the Meridian again. Sat at Table 12, ordered the salmon. The server new kid didn't know the history approached normally. No fear, no avoidance, just standard professional service. Victoria had left a 50% tip and felt lighter walking out than she had walking in. Progress wasn't linear. Some days she slipped back into old patterns, sharp words, impossible demands, the instinct to control everything because control meant safety. But Dylan's letter was a reminder that being a work in progress was enough, that trying mattered more than perfection, that the only way to become someone worth being was to keep showing up even when it was hard. She kept the letter in her briefcase. On days when board meetings felt like battles and shareholders questioned her decisions and old instincts whispered that caring was weakness, she read Dylan's words. You're doing good. It was enough to keep going, enough to keep trying, enough to believe that seeing people, really seeing them the way Marcus had seen her that night, was worth every risk it required. Portland's lights moved below her window, constant circulation, blood through arteries. Victoria stood watching and thought about a dishwasher who'd served her dinner when nobody else would, and an 8-year-old boy who'd learned from his father that being brave meant standing up even when it cost everything, and how both of them had taught her that power meant nothing if you couldn't see past it. She was still learning, still becoming, still discovering that the opposite of invisible wasn't powerful. It was present, it was being known, it was making space for others to exist fully without requiring them to diminish themselves. Victoria Sterling was a work in progress, and that finally was exactly what she needed to be.